Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Diversity Inclusion in Sport speaker series, powered by Kids Sport and the Calgary Flames Foundation. We're super grateful to have you here today and looking forward to a really incredible opportunity to connect with each other, to share lots of great information, and to use some engagement tools to learn as we go forward together. So the session today really is based on the rooting that we believe that education is so important in the space of diversity and inclusion, and understanding how we can do better to include more folks in our clubs and our communities to give kids the best opportunity to participate in sport possible. We know that our sports system maybe hasn't included some of the folks that it could, and so the impetus for the speaker series was really to come together and to find some new ways forward. We are going to share these series over the next 9 sessions. So between now and December, we have an amazing lineup of folks to bring forward to help facilitate and support these discussions, and a variety of resources to encourage you to think about how you can do more in your clubs and communities. We really want to recognize the Calgary Flames Foundation for their support of this work and the opportunity to do this work together. So this session is called Intro to Inclusion, and we're going to navigate through basic terminology, what this space means, and where you can start to think about how you navigate forward in this. And there is a workbook that will be shared in the chat that you can use to follow along the session. And you can download that, use it as a resource today, but also a takeaway resource to kind of remind you of some of the conversations we have as we go throughout. We're also going to use a tool called Menti Meter today, and we'll share the codes with you as we start to get towards that part of the presentation. And the Mentee Meter can also be shared out after as a resource on the website to remind you some of the things that we talked about today. I want to begin by acknowledging the territories that I'm coming to you from today. I'm based in Victoria, BC, and I'm really grateful to be an uninvited settler on the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular the nations of the Wasanic, Songhees, and Esquimalt nations. And it's been part of my responsibility and journey to really start to learn about the origin stories of these peoples, to explore the beautiful territory, and to understand how I can continue to work towards reconciliation. In your workbook, you'll note that we gave you a resource around territory acknowledgements as a starting point to kind of think about how you can do those and do those in authentic ways. So welcome for you to also kind of think about what that means for you, and what the territory, where the territory is that you're on today, and what some of the histories are of those incredible peoples. So my name is Andrea Carey. I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and elle. I'm the Chief Inclusion Officer with Inclusion Incorporated, and very proud to be partnering with Kids Sport, Calgary, Edmonton, and generally Alberta on this project, and really believe in the opportunity to give back to our community. And our company has been committed to both donating back time and resources as we've been building. And this is one of those initiatives, really believing in social responsibility and how we all contribute to create a better future together. I'm also on the board of directors for Kids Sport Victoria, where I live, and so contribute that way as well. I identify as a cisgender female, which means I identify as the same gender that I was born as. I'm married, and I have a 9-year-old daughter who's currently very infatuated with ice hockey. So that's a new sporting journey for our family that we're figuring out, but fun to see her just so engaged in that sport, and certainly trying to raise her as a multi-sport athlete who can participate in a variety of things throughout her lifespan. I identify as non-disabled, neurotypical, and a brain tumor survivor. I also come from Irish and Welsh backgrounds, and have not really begun my journey in learning too much about those histories yet. So that's a piece that I'm looking forward to diving into. I also identify as having been a settler in 2 other countries throughout my lifespan. And my educational background includes a Master's of Education in Leadership Studies. I'm a Canadian Certified Inclusion Professional and a Certified Executive Coach. So just so you have a little bit more knowledge about me, as we go through our speaker series, you'll meet some of our other team members from Inclusion Incorporated, who will be some of our amazing presenters and panelists as we go through the conversations. So today we're going to really dive into why this work needs to be undertaken in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And we're going to talk about what diversity, inclusion, and belonging are, and then some ways to start to plan for building this out in your club or community. And then we'll wrap up with the opportunity to go into back to tables and have some conversations about some of those areas and where you might want to prioritize that. So when we think about why this work needs to be undertaken, really being conscious that this is a space that has gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. And the heart of the matter is really about people and how we create the best possible opportunities for kids, youth, adults, anyone to partake in sport and physical activity programming in the spaces we're in. Generally, though, in terms of thinking about who's maybe not been included in our society, our sports, our programs, our services in the ways that they deserve to be. So thinking about sort of how each person needs to show up and what we need to do to support them to be successful. So when we think about who is Canada, our current demographics show us that we're just over 50% females and 50% male. That's a very gender binary. We'll talk about gender identities in our next speaker series in April. But we are starting to get some data to understand what the other gender identities are in Canada and how those are playing out and trending over time. So this is a space we're going to see lots of shifts in as we start to get census data, and really we're already seeing it in how people are showing up. When we think about disability, about 22% of the Canadian population identifies as having a disability. But we also know that we have an aging population and people tend to age into disability. And we have decreasing stigmas around mental health. And also we've been in a pandemic where mental health has been a topic for nearly everyone at some point or in some ways. And so we anticipate that the rates of disability will continue to increase as we go forward. And so paying attention to sort of how that's showing up for folks and what you need to do to plan to better include them. When we look at Black, Indigenous, and persons of color across Canada, about 4.9% of the population identifies as being Indigenous, and 22.3% of the population identifies as being persons of color, with a wide range of backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures, and races that are part of that makeup. And so huge diversity in terms of that population, and respecting that that is not, the label does not capture sort of the beauty and the diversity of what we need to be thinking about and planning for. So why are we here? We're really recognizing that through a variety of data sources, we're starting to understand how people are being excluded from our sport and physical activity systems, but also what they're facing when they do show up. And Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment Foundation did some survey work over the last year and a bit and identified that 1 out of 3 Black youth are directly facing racism in sport. 1 out of 4 Indigenous youth are facing racism in sport, and overall 1 in 5 Black, Indigenous, and persons of color youth are facing discrimination in sport and racism. So recognizing that we're not including everyone, in fact, we're actively having people leave the system because they're not having a great experience. When we look at girls in sport, we came into the pandemic with girls dropping out of sport at significantly higher rates than boys. And during the pandemic, we've seen that 9 in 10 girls have decreased or halted their participation in sport. And that's going to have impacts on mental and physical health, as well as social connections and friends. We also know that 1 in 4 girls are not committed to coming back to sport. So we have a lot of work to do to really support girls and to be very intentional about recruiting girls and ensuring they have a great experience when they do come. When we look at disability, kids with disabilities, Over the course of the pandemic, we saw physical activity rates for youth with disabilities drop. Again, we came into the pandemic with really low physical activity rates, and that's continued to drop off as we've gone through the pandemic. So again, another area to really pay attention to. And there are many. These are just some points around sort of how we start to think about this and consider what our why is for doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So this brings us to our first engagement activity. So we're going to use a tool called Menti Meter. On your phone, you can either scan the QR code that's on your screen, or you can go and enter the code that is up there. We will also put that in the chat, and we'll flip over to Menti and give you a chance to answer this question, and then for us to kind of review those answers and then come back into the presentation. So you're going to sit tight, but use your mobile device or your computer to answer that question, and then we'll show that up in the screen in just 1 second. So hopefully in the chat you can get the Menti code if you don't already have it. And now you should be able to see that we've started to populate that Menti Meter slide of what is your why for DEI. So we have things like to increase belonging in sport for everyone, working towards increasing girls' participation in our baseball program, kids deserve a better effort from our sport community, we can all play a role to create equity for all. Awesome, it's just got popped up, the Menti Meter code. In the chat if you missed it. All kids are welcome because it provides the best possible athlete experience to ensure all are being included. All children and youth deserve access to the positive health outcomes associated with physical activity so that everyone belongs. Awesome, keep them coming. Reducing barriers. Just 1 second. We've got our club has a strong commitment to our community. We want to increase our efforts around DEI, provide amazing benefits, realize the shortcomings and inclusivity in sport, meaningful participation in sport and recreation for everyone, ensure all kids are given the opportunity to feel welcome and play. A couple people are putting their comments in the chat box. Thank you for that. Programming for all. These are great. Leveling the field so everyone has access. I'm sure people have a space and feel like they have a space in their sport. Have an inclusive and accessible sports system. Competitive and recreational sports are for everyone and teaches everyone life lessons. Ensure that no child feels left out. Okay, awesome. Reducing boundaries or barriers for all athletes. Have to highlight girls in the sports. Break barriers. Beautiful. Recognize gaps in the desire to do better in our community. More access for people with disabilities. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. So as I said, we'll share this back to the community after the session. So if I didn't read yours out, it wasn't intentional, just lots coming up quickly. Yeah, we'll look to share that back, and we will use Menti Meter throughout the rest of the session. Okay, so we're going to pop back to our slides and share the next topic. So when you think about that why and sort of how that's resonating for you, our hope from today's session is that you'll start to understand more about the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and create more opportunities for how you can move this work forward. And we know that this work is new and can be really challenging, and that there's lots to learn. So our work at Inclusion Incorporated, we really root ourselves in this quote by Maya Angelou. of do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. And this is a constant learning journey. I'm learning every single day. And so it's your invitation to learn and to grow and to continue to improve as you learn. So we're going to dive into diversity, and really diversity is a reality that is all around us. Every single one of us is extremely diverse in how we show up in the world. I really love this quote by Stephen Frost, who is one of the leaders in diversity, equity, inclusion work globally. And he says, diversity is infinite and means all of us. And each of us does bring tremendous diversity. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. So what is, when we think about that slide we had with some of the demographics, thinking about sort of what does this mean? And essentially each of us is either a settler, a new immigrant, or Indigenous to Canada. And so thinking about sort of how do those identities show up for us, and what does that mean in terms of how we kind of root or nest ourselves in understanding what's going on around us and what we individually need to be successful. We're also in a time of constant migration. So we talked about some of those demographics around Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. We know that Black and persons of color numbers will continue to increase, particularly as we have more people moving to Canada, and our net population growth will come from new immigrants to Canada as we go forward. We're also seeing shifting cultural norms and expectations, particularly around areas like gender identities. So really appreciating how people show up and how they identify, and respecting that and creating safe spaces for them to be who they are. So overall, we have rapidly changing demographics. We need to recognize that no two people are the same, but we all have similarities. So we're going to ask you to flip back to Menti Meter to answer the question, what does diversity mean to you? And then we'll come back. So we'll have you share that, and then we'll come back and we'll look at what it means to in a definition, and then move on from there. So I'm going to share back the Menti Meter screen, and we'll track out on that area. So it should be open for you now. Okay, so what does diversity mean to you? Looking forward to these answers. Inclusive. We're going to talk about inclusion shortly, and share sort of how those areas are different. Opportunity, culture change, everyone, accessible, all perspectives, beauty, welcome, varying abilities, creativity, belonging. Oh, interesting. So we're going to talk about inclusion and then belonging next. Allowing me to be me. Varied, integrated, viewpoints, holistic, assets, change, language, experience, perspectives, humanity, well-rounded, powerful, comprehensive, embracing differences. Lovely. Awesome. A mosaic. Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Awesome. I'll read off a couple more and then we'll flip back. Different viewpoints. Holistic. Canada. Community. Ooh, lovely. Unique. Okay, amazing. Thank you for contributing to that. Feel free to pop those in if you haven't had a chance yet, and we will come back to that again and share that back over the next our post session. Okay, so we're going to pop to a definition of diversity. Diversity is a reality created by individuals and groups from a broad spectrum of demographic and philosophical differences. It's about understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. These can be along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. And if you've had a chance to download the workbook, this definition shows up in the workbook for you as a resource to take away and think about. So lots of these areas came up in how you were populating the Menti Meter. And so kind of thinking about how each of those pieces show up for you, how they show up for the people in your programs, and for who you're thinking about when you're thinking about the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're going to share a little video with you, and then we can continue to navigate from there. But this video I find really interesting, just to think about sort of what our assumptions are and how we're kind of weaving together a story about the people around us and even ourselves. So here you go.
I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family.
I hope that resonates with you in terms of kind of thinking about this space and what are those stories of, as I said earlier, yourself or the people around you that are helpful to really understand and be able to dig into so you can appreciate what you need to do to support them and to be successful in your programs, which ties into inclusion, which we'll get to shortly. So you can find the entire TED Talk from Chimamanda on the TED site. You can just Google Danger of a Single Story, and you can watch. It's about 17 minutes long, the full one, but I love this portion of it. The other piece that's really interesting is Chimamanda came under a bit of controversy over the last couple of years in recognizing that, you know, no one thing has a single story or narrative. And she made a comment around trans women identities, which, as I've dug into, I feel like she has the perspective was woven into a single story as well. So interesting how we can kind of all get caught up in that. And I thought the irony of someone who has spoken out so strongly about the danger of a single story, then getting also woven into a single story was quite interesting to think about how we navigate. So I hope that resonated and brought it to life. I love the comments coming up in the chat. You're also welcome to ask questions. We'll navigate towards those towards the end of the session, but you can certainly populate them now. And yes, the video can be found on YouTube, and you're welcome to look it up. So when we think about diversity, we really identify that there's 3 types of diversity. So there's demographic diversity, so characteristics like race, gender, ethnicity, identities, and faith. There's life experiences, which are things around our interactions with others, our education, our work experience, our sport experience, our hobbies, where we visited, where we've lived, who we grew up with, languages we speak. And then we also have cognitive diversity, and every single one of us processes things differently. We receive information differently, we share back differently, we listen differently. And so all of how we process it connects into that cognitive diversity. And so those 3 pieces of 3 types of diversity really kind of connect to create our reality of how we experience the world and how the world experiences us. And we can go further into that to look at kind of internal dimensions of those aspects of diversity and acquired and changing dimensions. And so some of the internal ones are things like your age, your sex at birth, your gender identity, your mental and physical abilities, your race and ethnicity. And then some of the acquired and changing ones are more like things like education, your political beliefs, your language and communication skills, your role, your income levels, your appearance. So all of those pieces create this sort of network of how we show up in the world and how we have different intersections or intersectionalities, which has become a very hot topic word over the last couple of years, thinking about how those pieces all come together to connect how the world experiences us and how we experience it. And some of us have simpler intersections, and some of us have much more complex intersectionalities. And intersectionalities is a term that was coined by a Black feminist in the US named Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's really thinking about sort of how those aspects come together to connect, but also how they create privilege or barriers or oppressions to how we're experiencing the world. And so depending on what some of those aspects are of how you show up in the world, your experience will be really different. So thinking about sort of for your participants, what does that mean in terms of how they're showing up in the world and what they're trying to navigate and navigate and deal with in order to just get to your program or to have access to the services that they want on a regular basis. So all of that comes together to think about, okay, if diversity is our reality, then inclusion is really our choice about how we start to intentionally plan for diverse peoples to be part of our programs. And so we're going to flip back to Menti Meter and think about sort of what inclusion means to you. And then we'll come back and share a definition of it. So welcoming you to start to answer that question. And I'm going to open the survey for you, and you'll be able to start populating it, and then we'll share it up. Okay, we're starting to get some answers in there. So we've got opportunity, everyone can participate. Open arms, equity, acceptance, creativity, adaptive. Now they're coming quick. Connections, all persons, empowering, belongingness, welcoming, no barriers, all abilities, growth. This is awesome. Thank you. Challenging personal biases, diverse participation, the opportunity, alliance, inviting, not othered, good one, safety, empathy, acceptance, acknowledgement, nothing for us without us, great one, free, room for everyone. Amazing. Thank you for sharing all of these. Again, we'll share this back out post-session. A couple more popping in. Openness, open-minded, together. Super. Non-judgmental. We'll end with that one. Okay. Awesome. We're going to pop back to our slides and navigate what the definition of diversity or of inclusion is. Sorry. And yeah, thanks for all of those. I'm looking forward to continuing to read those post-session. So the definition of inclusion is a dynamic state of operating in which diversity is leveraged to create a fair, healthy, and high-performing organization or community. An inclusive environment ensures equitable access to resources and opportunities for all. It also enables individuals and groups to feel safe, respected, engaged, motivated, and valued for who they are and for their contributions towards organizational and societal goals. So lots of the pieces that you just brainstormed have certainly popped up in that definition as well, but kind of thinking about how we intentionally think about and plan for each person to be part of our programs. So how do we do that? What does that look like? This graphic as well as in your workbook, as well as that definition I just shared with you. So when we think about how our programs are structured, we're kind of in this reality space right now where some people have exactly what they need, like that person in the red shirt. And some people have either way more or way less than what they need in order to participate. And so at the top of that stack of boxes is actually a person's feet, just cut off there, but they have way more than what they need to participate, in this case, to view the baseball game. And then that person in the purple shirt is actually not just standing on the ground, they're actually below the ground. They're starting from kind of literally a hole in terms of trying to navigate how to access what they want to participate in. Then we look at the concept of equality, and equality creates the assumption that everyone benefits from that same support. So in this case, in the picture, you can see the boxes that are there. The person in the yellow pants is standing on a box and is quite tall, and so doesn't really need the box to be able to see over the fence. The individual in the red shirt, that's the perfect support for them. They can see over the fence quite well with the red box, and that's what they need. The individual in the purple shirt has that one box, but that's not nearly enough for them. So that's not actually helping them at all. So out of those three people who have the exact same thing, equality, only one person is really benefiting from that support. Then when we think about equity, equity is about people getting the support they actually need to be successful. And in this case, when we look at the picture, the person in the yellow pants doesn't have a box because they don't need a box. They don't need a support in this case. Person in the red shirt has that one box. That's the right support for them. The person in the purple shirt has two boxes, And that's actually what they needed to be able to participate and view the game. So that in this case, the different supports that were put in place are meeting the needs of the person. When we go to that fourth picture, of justice, justice is actually the removal of the barrier or the inequity that was there in the first place. So in this case, the fence is removed altogether. And that means that you don't actually need different supports because there's not the barrier that people are trying to navigate around. So when we put this in a sport context, thinking about sort of what people's experiences are in trying to register or participate in our sport programs, in reality, there's many people who are facing different circumstances, different barriers to their participation. So in reality, we have lots of people that have way more than they need to be able to participate in our programs. And we have lots of people that don't have nearly enough and are in that hole. We have many programs in our system that provide equality. So those programs are there, they're available for people. There might be programs where they can get funding support, for example, which is one of the key services that Kids Sport offers and Jumpstart offers. And so they can get access to the registration fees, but they may still need transportation or equipment supports. Or maybe they don't even have enough food to be fueled to go to that activity. So there might be other things they're facing that aren't being supported in an inequality model. Then we look at equity and think about what would be those pieces we need to put in place in order to support them. And so thinking about having that conversation, connecting with those participants and learning what those are. So it may be that they need fees, and they may also need transportation, and they may also need equipment, and they may also need food, or to not have some childcare duties that they might have at home, those types of things. And how do we start to support people to meet them on an equity basis, to break down all those barriers? Then we look at a justice example, and a justice example would actually be taking away all those barriers altogether. So this actually looks more like a co-creation of a program opportunity for, with, and by a community to support what their needs are. And we can see these types of examples in our Paralympic sports system, our Special Olympics sports system, our Indigenous sports systems, where we've created whole systems to remove the barriers that those participants are facing in our specific programs. So I hope that's kind of helpful in terms of thinking about some of this. So as we think about inclusion and some of those models of how we can start to navigate this and put equity or justice into play, thinking about sort of part of that why. And one of the pieces is thinking about respondents. So people in the survey that we're quoting who felt included in their organizations or programs in this case are nearly 3 times more likely to feel than their peers to feel excited by and committed to that organization or activity. And when we think about sort of people continuing to stay in our sport and physical activity system, we need to really intentionally plan for people to feel included, to keep them in our programs. And we know with COVID that we've often, as we saw with some of the girls' data and the disability data, we are losing participants. So we need to be super intentional about supporting them to stay in our programs. So if we think about diversity being our reality, inclusion being our choice, then belonging is really our opportunity. And belonging is really about how people feel in that program or opportunity. So how do you feel when you feel like you belong? So we're going to go back to Menti Meter and have you answer this question. And then we will navigate from there, looking a little bit at the definition of belonging and a little video coming up as well. So I'll share up the Menti Meter as you start to populate it, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Okay, waiting for our first answers to come on in. Okay, we've got, oh wow, fast and furious, togetherness, fitting in. We'll talk about that in a minute. Acceptance, safe, feeling heard and seen. Oh, beautiful. Feeling at home, no barriers, having peers around me for who you are, commitment, together, teammates, engagement, seeing people like me, being recognized, being able to do it my way, joyful, comfort, active role, supports are in place, community to join, nice one, sports system change, happy, joyful, welcoming, warmth, support, friendship, understood. Ooh, that's a good one to leave us on. Understood, I like it. Okay, camaraderie, respect. Oh, so many good ones. Commitment, amazing. Accepted, a community. All right, awesome. Okay, well, we're going to flip back to a definition of belonging and see what our definition has to say. So our definition is the experience of personal involvement in a system or environment so that persons feel themselves to be an integral part of that system or environment. Again, you have this definition in your workbook to use. And so thinking about that, and I know I flagged when it came into the chat box, the fitting in piece. So we're going to watch a little video about belonging, and this is by the amazing Brené Brown.
Belonging. We're wired for love. We're hardwired for belonging. It's in our DNA. But let me tell you what belonging is. The opposite of belonging from the research is fitting in. That's the opposite of belonging. Fitting in is assessing and acclimating. Here's what I should say, be. Here's what I shouldn't say. Here's what I should avoid talking about. Here's what I should dress like, look like. That's fitting in. Belonging is belonging to yourself first, speaking your truth, telling your story, and never betraying yourself for other people. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And that's vulnerable.
Ooh, requires you not to change who you are, but to be who you are versus fitting in. So I hope that resonated for folks. I remember when I first watched that video and I was like, oh my gosh, game changer. So when we think about that and sort of think about this continuum of how we're engaged in our environments, we really need to think about like supporting the diversity of who's showing up in our programs, creating that really welcoming environment for people to walk in that door, and then for them to feel safe once they're there so that they have that psychological safety. And supporting and engaging them, connecting with them, figuring out what it is that they need to feel supported builds that inclusion, which will lead people to commit to being there and then to ultimately feel like they belong there. So a little bit of a continuum to leave you with in this space to think about what that looks like and feels like. And so as leaders, thinking about this space and what we need to do to be so intentional about supporting folks, I love to root myself in this Mahatma Gandhi quote of "You must be the change you wish to see in the world," and thinking about what each of us needs to do each day to really show up for and support those that haven't been part of our systems. How do we actively reach out, bring them in, support them in that experience, create the cultures and the environments where they feel safe, welcomed, included, and really want to be part of. So we're going to share with you 9 recommendations for sport and physical activity leaders that came from Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment Foundation in a report that they did last year. And we have the link for you also in the links that we've been sharing on the Kids Sport website. And so you're welcome to download this whole resource, but we're going to walk you through it and the 9 recommendations. And so pay attention to the 9 recommendations, because we're actually going to ask you at the end of the 9 to vote on which one you would prioritize. So thinking about how we design around why youth play. So we often have kind of created programs and expected kids and to come to them, but have we thought about sort of why they really want to be there and what's most important to youth? And so thinking about what some of those things might be, but are they, do they feel safe? Is it a social environment? Is it accessible for them? Is it fun? What are some of those reasons that they're choosing to partake in that activity? So designing around why youth play is number 1. Number 2, reviewing and incorporating the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. And if you're not familiar with those, there's 94 calls to action that were created and published in 2015. There's 5 of them that have a direct connection to sport and physical activity. So thinking about what you can do to be a better ally, to move reconciliation forward through your sport and physical activity program. At the beginning of today, I recognized the territories that I'm an uninvited settler on. That's part of my my personal commitment to the space, but it's not just about recognizing the territory. It's what does that mean to me, and how can I build better understanding as I move forward about what the histories are and what some of the tragedies have been in our history, and how we learn from and do better as we go forward. Understanding access, equity, and engagement issues to youth sport in our community. So this one's really thinking about who's in that community, what are they wanting and needing in order to participate in our sport programs. And if you are offering a program and you don't really know who's in your community, this is an opportunity to think about that and really look at what are the demographics in your community, and does your sport or physical activity reflect what those demographics are? And if not, why not? What are some of those barriers, and how do you intentionally build some of the relationships to start to engage those communities in a better way? And again, that sort of thinking about, you can do a program for, you can do a program with, so kind of a co-creation, or you could also have that community actually build their own program and you figure out how you support that rather than doing it for them. So that's kind of a bit of a continuum to think about in this space. Creating a welcoming environment. So how do you create that welcoming environment, and think about some of the culturally relevant approaches that you might need to take? How do you really get to know who's in the program and what their needs are in terms of supports, but also just in terms of how you bring them together to really connect with each other and build those relationships. So much of sport participation is about those social connections. And we've had a massive gap in social connection over the last 2 years with the pandemic. So what a huge opportunity you have as sport and physical activity leaders to really build that story in a different way and support folks to get to know their teammates and the other participants that are in the program. Looking at your recruitment and hiring practices to increase representation. So if you can see it, you can be it is kind of a common saying these days. So thinking about some of your coaches, staff, volunteers, and how you're cultivating diversity to have more folks from equity deserving communities be part of your team. And then that will also help build engagement and connection back to those communities and to the youth coming up to see that there's those role models to connect to. And I love right now seeing, on some of our major media channels have more diverse reporters. We just saw this week one of the women's hockey leagues promoted a Black woman to be a co-owner. We're just seeing the shift in like how we're starting to support and elevate some of the voices that we haven't been seeing before. And it's beautiful. We need to maintain health and safety protocols. So parents are going to be looking and paying attention to how we're taking care of safety in a very different way than we would have navigated before. We also are in the thick of people really thinking about safe sport as a topic, and how are we keeping their kids safe and having really caring, supportive and trusted adults as part of our programs. So looking at some of the opportunities in terms of what the Coaching Association of Canada's put out in terms of the responsible coaching movement, but then also what are the health protocols that are in place in your health region, and how are you making sure that you're staying on top of that and creating an environment where parents feel really comfortable sending their kids. Be a good neighbor and engage with the community. So thinking about how you really connect with key stakeholders, organizations, businesses in the community to ensure that you're building community through your sport program. Sport has the power to change the world, and that's a really incredible thing to have the privilege to be a part of. And so how are we really using sport for good and connecting with those around us to do it together? Number 8, allocate facilities based on community needs. And thinking about, we talked about intersectionality earlier. Who's part of your community? What are some of those overlapping identities? And making sure that we're building programs for those different identities and how they're showing up and what their needs are, but also how we're allocating facilities to that. And we have a lot of historical facility allocations in our country that have just always happened, or they've been there the longest, so they have seniority over booking those facilities. And how do we start to shake that up and think about who's not getting ice time or field time, or they're getting inequitable ice and field times, as an example? And do we have a good balance in terms of male and female teams getting ice time? Where do we go with teams that have mixed genders? How are we starting to just really support and create the access for people to use the facilities in their community in a more equitable way? Number 9, offer inclusive and adaptive opportunities in your sport. So thinking about the different abilities that might come into your sport. And we talked about earlier in our demographics of Canada around mental health. And so thinking about how that's going to shift, and what do you need to do to really support people both in physical abilities, mental health, to show up and be part of your program. I strongly believe that out of the pandemic, we're going to have ongoing trauma. And so thinking about how you can support trauma-informed practices in your program. And if you're not familiar with trauma-informed practices, that might be a piece for you to follow up on after this session, to just really start to think about, what does that look like? What do you need to do to set up people for success? How do you meet them where they're at each time and create that level of support as well in your program? And are you offering your program in a place that people can get to, that has accessibility for those different abilities? So we've given you 9 ideas about some ways to think forward in this space. And we're going to invite you in a few minutes to do a little bit of a ranking of that. Not quite yet, but we'll be popping that up shortly. So as we kind of tie this together and think about how we're leaders in this space and what this means to you, appreciating that there's lots of information out there and lots of ways to navigate forward in this space. And really thinking about sort of what resonates out of today, and how do we really move this work forward in a way that's going to be supportive for you? What do you feel unsure about? What do you feel confident in? What do you still want more information about? And we'll ask you that question on Menti Meter shortly. So first I'm going to pop up the Menti Meter link and ask you to weigh in on those 9 areas and what it is that you would want to do to be able to move, or what's sort of the top area for you to move forward. So you're going to go into Menti Meter and vote for that, and then we'll navigate into sort of those areas that you're still curious or unsure about. So the Menti Meter code is now in the chat box, and I will just pop the Menti Meter up and we can get you to vote on those in real time and see which of those 9 really resonated the strongest for you. Oh, I love it. Watching the votes come in is so fun. Okay, they're popping around. Nice. Okay, seems to be trending that understand access, equity, and engagement issues. Second, creating a welcoming environment. Third, offer inclusive and adaptive opportunities. Oh, they're bobbing around. Let's see. Keep voting. This is great. The problem with showing up the results is sometimes I feel like we have a bit of a confirmation bias. We want to kind of vote for the ones that are similar to what's already been voted at the top. Awesome. Okay, we'll keep the votes coming. We are about 44 votes so far. But it seems like that access, equity, and engagement seems to be number 1, and inclusive and adaptive opportunities, number 2, and a welcoming environment. And then designing around why youth play is definitely popping up there a bit more. Super. So at the end of the session today, we're going to have an opportunity to go back to tables where you started today and to have a bit of a conversation about some of these with colleagues that are in the space. So awesome. Okay. We will park this poll and go back to our slides now and look to give you one more Menti Meter, which I'm actually going to preview for you because it's the next slide. So we're not going to share these back to you right now, but we're going to, I'm opening this one for what you're still curious about and want to learn more about. We'll share this back after the session, but we're going to pop back to really now open it up for you to ask questions, to think about sort of what it is you don't know that you'd still like to know, and recognizing, of course, we have 9 more sessions coming up, but really that opportunity for you to share both in Menti Meter so we can plan forward on some of this, but also opening it up to the Q&A to allow us some time together to think about what it is you'd like to know more about. So feel free to pop anything in the Q&A that is coming up for you. And then we will go from there. No questions yet, other than how you get to a meeting room from the main screen, which Dean has answered in the chat for you. So feel free to ask questions and think about, like, in this journey, what's next for you? What's next for your club or community that you really want to start to dive into? And what resources do you need to support that? What does trauma-informed look like? Thank you for that, Catherine. So trauma-informed is starting to think about, with trauma often shows up in behaviors or kind of what can be termed as like maladaptions to environments. So often people aren't showing up particularly well in those environments. And thinking about what it is you need to understand about that person. There's a really amazing book that actually Oprah was part of writing that came out last year, that's called What Happened to You. And often with trauma, we because people are not showing up well, or there's behavior issues, we kind of go to what's wrong with you. And this book is reframing it to what happened to you, to really understand what people's journeys are, and what that traumatic event was and how that's showing up for them, and creating that really safe and supportive environment for people to learn about that and to then support that. And that doesn't necessarily fall entirely on a sport club to try and undertake. I appreciate that probably sounds a bit more like counseling, and it is, but how do you create that safety, being that caring adult or caring coach or caring leader that person, that child, that individual can come to and have a relationship, but taking that time to really appreciate what is it that's going on for them. What do they need to feel safe in that? Because often it's probably the behavior is probably showing up because they don't feel safe, or they're kind of reacting to other dynamics that are going on in their life, not necessarily what's happening in front of you. And then how do you dig in to continue to support them going forward, so that they know that this is a place they can come and have a good experience, and that someone understands, listening, kind of seeing, hearing, and understanding where they're at. So that's some basics around trauma informed, and would highly recommend you do some reading on that. There's trainings out there and resources that are starting to dig more into supporting this. So I see a question about where to start getting basic EDI training for coaches and staff. This is one place we're trying to create to get that started for you and to give you some free resources to start in this space. There's many different opportunities in the sport system, including the Coaching Association of Canada has some resources they're developing. There's the Canadian Women in Sport, which we will have when we get to our gender equity session later this year. They have lots of resources around girls and women. There's resources from national entities like Jumpstart, who have done a few different e-learning pieces around girls in sport and supporting different abilities. So there are many options out there, and our company does lots of training as well with sport organizations. Okay, next question. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through. The next question I see is, someone made a comment around sometimes children act out because you are their space and they feel comfortable. Absolutely. And I think probably any parents in the audience might resonate with that you're often the one your child acts out to the most, and recognizing that that is because they feel safe and know they can trust you. And Dean put in the chat as well around the Autism and Asperger's Friendship Society is interested in supporting training as well. So that's awesome. How do you connect with a community group without overstepping as a settler or majority group? It's really about relationship and taking time and space to build out that relationship and create the opportunity for that dialogue, and starting by asking what they're doing and what would be supportive of them, rather than making any assumptions about what they want or need. Never hesitate to reach out to families and organizations to ask questions. Yeah, great point. Okay. How do we do this in an industry that is volunteer run? Yeah, great question. And this is where I think there's such power in working together, because some of these are they're big topics, right? And so how do we make sure that we are not kind of using our minimal resources, all kind of chasing down the same things? So I would highly recommend collaborating with other organizations and pooling resources and pooling time and energy into this type of work. And one of the areas where I think we have huge opportunities is thinking about how, again, we kind of build those relationships with the communities that we're wanting to better include, and doing that not solo, because likely that community does not want just one sport opportunity. They probably want many. So how could you build some strategic relationships, maybe for some multi-sport opportunities, or for recognizing that the learnings you would have through that work would translate to a whole variety of other organizations. I think those are all the questions I'm seeing so far, but feel free to pop one up. I'm going to share the next slide, which is about our next session, which is in April 13th, and it's around including gender identities in sport. And so I will be your moderator for the series, but we will have two incredible guests next time that identify in the trans and non-binary gender identities. And so they will share their learnings and experiences in sport, and we will share a variety of resources to support you in that journey as well. So we had a question about, can you please provide the link to the 9 recommendations? Yes, I believe Kevin shared it a little bit earlier, but we'll reshare it for you. And we have a hub page of where you can find the resources for each of these sessions as we go forward. So we'll continue to build out a bit of a resource hub for you as we navigate through the 9 sessions. Will you get an email to register for the next session? That's a great question. I think I will let Kevin answer that, because I'm not sure quite how that works, but the link is on here, and we'll pop the link to register as well into the chat so that it's easy to access. And when you go back to the table room, there's also a little screen at the bottom that has a little scrolling message about the next session, and you can actually click directly on that to register, which is also pretty awesome. Other questions? Okay, well, here's your next steps. So I want to say thank you again to both KidSport, as well as to obviously the Calgary Flames Foundation for the support of this. And we have a next step for you, so don't run away just yet. We are recording each of these, and we're also sending them out to Facebook Live. So you'll be able to access these on our YouTube channel, the KidSport YouTube channel, post this session, and watch it or share it out to your network. So it's a great opportunity. But what we're going to invite you to do now is to actually stay with us, and we're going to create tables that are about those 9 recommendations, and invite you to join us to have little breakout room discussions, or table discussions as they'd be called in Remo, around each of those 9 topics, and kind of dig into a few ideas of how you can maybe move that work forward. So that will kind of conclude our session today in terms of you seeing me, but you're going to go out back into the main room, and you can pop around to the tables and talk about those 9 areas. So hopefully that will be supportive for you in creating some next steps. And just want to, again, really acknowledge the Flames Foundation and KidSport for this incredible opportunity to connect and to share and to start to build more knowledge and capacity in a space that's rapidly changing. So thank you so much for being here, and for answering so thoroughly into the Menti Meter over the last hour, and looking forward to our next session together.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrea. That was so great. I'm going to wonder if Kevin is going to come up, or do you want me to try and do a quick demo, Kevin, and show people how this works?
If you can show us, Dean, that would be great.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to pull up and hello, everybody. I'm Dean Simota from the Autism Asperger's Friendship Society and Connection virtual events. We love running these events in very new, cool ways. So you'll see on the screen here a shared room, just like the one we're going to go back to shortly. And you can see here, if I want to find myself, because there's a lot of people here, ideally a lot of people still around, I click this button and I'll highlight myself there, find myself at that table. If I want to move tables, Simply double click on a table, and I move over there. You only see and hear the people at your table. And then Andrea was mentioning these sponsored banners and their partners. And you'll see here, this banner here, if you click this one, that'll take you right out to a link for the further sessions and also information on everything coming up. Of course, the Flames Foundation, Inclusion Incorporated, and a kids sport banner for more information. If you need special help, come find us. We'll be popping around the room. As long as you get your camera microphone on, double click tables to move around, and we may get some table names there based on the 5 top answers. Is that what you wanted, Andrea? Kind of to funnel people? Yeah. Sure. Otherwise, move around at your leisure, take control of your experience, and the room is open till 1:30 for all the amazing discussions that you'd love to have. And I know some folks were messaging me when I put a message about AFS in the chat, Autism Asperger's. We're around the room, so definitely message me and we'll come find you and have a chat. We love sport, and we love this whole series about learning more about how we can do better to include and incorporate more diversity in our programs. So awesome. We'll see everybody back in the room, and goodbye.